Hello again, and welcome to Over the Hill Outdoors. Today I'm going fishing with my bow and arrow, but what I'll be doing is not your traditional bow fishing. Lake fishing from shore requires that you can cast your lure or your bait out to water that's deep enough to hold fish, and sometimes that can be quite a distance and maybe even beyond your reach. So today I'll imagine that I'm in a wilderness situation, wilderness survival situation, where either I brought some fishing line and a few hooks, or maybe I just found some by scrounging along the shoreline. But what I don't have is a modern fishing pole or a reel, and so I can't throw or cast my line far enough out there to reach the fish. I admit this isn't a very likely scenario, but it could happen. So what I'll be doing today is demonstrating a couple of unconventional casting techniques that I've used to greatly increase my casting distance. I'll start out with a technique that I call bowcasting. Let's say I want to fish with a set line with my hooks either near the surface or perhaps suspended in the water column, but not resting on the bottom. Bowcasting is nothing more than using my bow and arrow to launch the set line further out than I could throw it otherwise. And then the arrow, which will have the line attached to it, will act as my float or as a bobber. So here's how I do it. First thing I'm going to do is put the line through the eye of one of my hooks, one or more hooks, and then I'll slide them down the line and secure them in place with an overhand knot. Or if you're adding hooks later, you could simply create a bite in the line, push it through the eye of the hook, then pull the hook back through the loop and tighten it. Either way. If desired, I could add some small wooden floats or bobbers between the hooks. I've just carved out some small sticks, kind of an hourglass shape, and then I use a clove hitch to attach the bobber or the float in the line. You just need enough to float the hook in the bait. The bigger the float, the more drag it creates on the arrow, and the less distance the arrow will fly. So keep the bobber as small as you can and still have it do its job. Once I've got my hooks on the line, as many hooks as I need, then I will tie the line to the nock end of the arrow. Once I've got my line all rigged, then I will lay out the line on the beach in a serpentine pattern to get it ready to shoot. It's important to put this line out away from where you're standing so you don't get all tangled up. And then when it comes time to shoot the arrow with the line attached to it, make sure that you have the line over the top of your arm that's holding the bow so that you don't get hooked as that line shoots out. It's also important to make sure you stand off to the side and even maybe back behind the line on the beach, so that when it starts shooting out, it's not coming past you, you're behind it. Okay, now it's time to shoot the arrow. I shoot it out there. The arrow then will act as my primary float or bobber, with my other bobber closer to the hook. The fewer the hooks and bobbers, the further the arrow is going to fly. In this case, I have only one hook and one bobber on the line. Now in the second example, I have 5 hooks and 5 bobbers attached on the line, and you can see that the arrow does not fly as far, but it still gets my hooks out into the fishy water. Today I'm using a light kid's bow with less than 20 pounds pull at full draw, so you don't need a high-powered bow. If you didn't have a bow and arrow, which you may not in a survival situation, you could easily make one that's good enough for the job. If for some reason a bow and arrow isn't an option for you in a survival situation, you could consider an atlatl. and a spear, also called a dart, to launch the line and hooks. I made this crude atlatl in just a few minutes using just an old stick I found on the shoreline. It's going to let me throw my spear at least 2 times further than I normally could, maybe even more. For the spear, I'm using just a long semi-straight stick, which will act as my primary float or bobber once I get it out in the lake. I start by putting my hooks and bobbers on the line, just as before. This time I will put 2 hooks and 3 bobbers on the set line. I'm using pieces of nightcrawler for my bait. Once my set line is all rigged, then I'll tie one end to the spear as if it were my arrow, and then lay out the line on the bank in a serpentine pattern so that it doesn't get tangled when I throw it. Then I step to the side so the hooks don't snag me as they go whizzing by, and because I throw right-handed, I'll have the line on the opposite side of me compared to when I was shooting the arrow. Then there's nothing left to do now but throw the spear as far as I can. Then I let it sit and wait for the fish to bite. And this time, fortunately, it didn't take that long for some success. Here's a carp. And on the second hook, a bullhead catfish, also known locally here as a mudcat, that I've caught on my 2 hooks. Not my first choice for a meal, but certainly edible and very much appreciated, I'm sure, if I were in a survival situation. Now, if I want my hooks to stay out for a long time and not be pushed to the shore by wind or by waves, I'd want some kind of a fixed or anchor set line, but the challenge is getting an anchor far enough out into the lake to be effective when you're just having to throw it from shore. But I have had pretty good success setting out an anchor from the shore using the technique that I call the hammer throw. And here's how I do it. First, I tie a length, maybe 3-foot length of paracord to a rock to make a crude track meet like hammer. Or if I had a sock that I could spare, and maybe one that needed some washing, I could fill it with some sand or gravel and then tie off the top of the sock with my paracord, and that's what I've done today. You could also use a bandana or a piece of t-shirt or whatever else you have available to create some kind of a pouch to fill with sand or gravel. Next, I tie a loop in the end of the paracord. Then I will thread as many hooks as I want onto the end of my fishing line, and then tie that end of the fishing line securely to my paracord loop on the hammer. In this arrangement, you're going to end up with all your hooks on the bottom. If I want some hooks suspended a little above the bottom, I'll attach some small pieces of wood to the main line like I did before. And then you lay out your line on the beach in the serpentine pattern as before so that it doesn't get tangled when the anchor is tossed. Once again, when it comes time to throw it, be sure to stand with the line between you and the shoreline so that the hooks don't get you as they go by. And now wind up and give the anchor a toss. With this fixed set line, you need to pull in the anchor every time you want to check your bait or retrieve a fish. If the bottom's rocky or full of snags, that can be a major problem. You'll probably end up losing, as they say, hook, line, and sinker, along with any fish you might have on the line. So, to avoid that issue, I've used a slightly more complicated setup that lets me leave my anchor out in the lake but still retrieve my line, and I call it the clothesline method. And here's how it works. This diagram represents an aerial view of my setup showing the lake and the shoreline. The big brown dot at the top of the triangle is my anchor out on the bottom of the lake that I put there using my hammer throw method. The smaller brown dots at the two bottom corners of this triangle are stakes pounded into the ground on the beach. The red line represents my fishing line, forming a triangle shaped loop with the sides labeled as A, B, and C. The line runs through the anchor rope's loop rather than being attached directly to the anchor or the rope. That's important. The black X's represent hooks and bobbers positioned along the line and making up side B of the triangle loop, and then there are no hooks or bobbers on the other two legs of the triangle. It works this way. I start adding hooks and bobbers to the line on side C, and then by pulling the line on side A in towards me, the line on side B goes out, taking my hooks and bobbers back out toward the anchor point. And by the way, it also can work for putting out a gill net, but you'll need probably a little heavier anchor, some bigger floats on the gill net, and take a little bit more care as you move it in and out, but it also works. Then to bring my hooks in to check bait or retrieve a fish, I just reverse the line direction, pulling the line on side B in toward me so that the line on side A goes out, and the anchor remains in place all this time. So here's how I'm setting it up today. First, I pound two stakes on the beach. They will be the two bottom corners of my set line triangle, and the further apart you set these stakes, the less likely your lines are going to be to tangle. This is about as far as I could get them apart here today. I'd like them a little further apart though if I could. Next, I run the end of the fishing line through the loop in my anchor rope, and then I pull through enough line to exceed how far I think I can throw that anchor. Now I lay that line out carefully on the beach to my left in a serpentine pattern, and on the other side of the anchor rope loop I measure out that same length of line and I lay it on the beach to my right, again in a serpentine pattern, so that in total my fishing line is long enough to reach out to the anchor and back with a little extra. For example, if I can throw the anchor, say 25 yards out from the bank, I'll need a little more than 50 yards of line with half on either side of the anchor loop. In this diagram, the star represents where I'll be standing to throw out the anchor. Half the fishing line is laid out on the beach to my left and half on my right. Next, I tie a line extension to my anchor rope with a piece of wood at the top of that rope to act as a marker buoy. It's going to show me about where my anchor is on the lake bottom. I need to estimate the water depth out where my anchor is going to be, and today I'm figuring it's about 7 or 8 feet deep, so that's how long my buoy rope needs to be. It needs to be able to float to the surface above the anchor. Now, standing between the two coils of line, as I showed you in that diagram, I swing and throw the anchor and buoy as far as I can out into the lake. I then separate any tangles that I might have in the two fishing lines, making sure that they slide back and forth through the anchor rope loop. And then I place the lines over their respective beach stakes. Now I tie the two lines together to create a giant triangle loop. And if I haven't already done it, I now add my hooks and bobbers to the line on side C of the triangle on the beach. Once the hooks and bobbers are in place, then I slowly pull the line on my left, which is side A of the triangle, to gradually extend my hooks and bobbers out to the anchor buoy along side B of my line triangle. And once my furthest hook and bobber reach near the buoy, I simply tie the line off and wait for the fish to bite. To retrieve a fish or to check my hooks, I simply reverse the direction of my line pull to bring everything back to shore. So there you have it. Thank you for watching the video. These methods are not foolproof, but if you ever find yourself in a survival situation where you lack a modern rod and reel and you can't cast your hook and line far enough out there to reach a fish, perhaps one or more of these techniques might come in handy. So until next time, enjoy the great outdoors and be safe out there.